This is FCC Station Checklist class, and I'm Rob Branch, and just happy to be here and helping you guys, hopefully. So what I need now to tailor this custom is I need to know what kind of stations do you have, full power or low power. Okay, so you're low, full for you, full for you, full, low for you, and full for you. Okay. All right, the low power guys, checklist each. And low power. Sure. And you got the fulls? Okay. And you got to give me a low and a full because I don't have one to follow along unless I use my computer. Okay. Yeah. Okay, does everybody have a checklist that's participating? Oh, you don't? Okay. Yeah, I think I do. There you go. Wait a minute. Yeah, right. I'm good. All right. Well, now it's about half and half of actually attendees, so now I'm really confused. No, I got to address all of this. I think what I'm going to do, if it's okay, because the low power isn't going to take as long. So I think I'll start with low power and make sure you guys are covered, because most of your full power guys are more afraid of the FCC than the low power guys, right? So you know a little bit more. Pray them away every day, absolutely. Okay. I had a PowerPoint, but it only had one slide on it, and that slide was just to tell you what you need to know before we get into this, because there's a few key things. There are some misnomers about FCC checklists like this, and about the FCC in general, their resources and what they do. So I want to just give you a few tips. First of all, I mean, this was put out by the FCC, but this is not the rules. That's very important. The rules are Code of Federal Regulations, Title 47, Section 73 or 74 dot whatever number is next to the relevant rule section for broadcasting, okay? So you can look through this list, and this is a good guideline, and the FCC says that if you abide by everything on the list that you're going to be generally okay. But that doesn't mean that you're abiding by all the rules necessarily, and it also doesn't mean that there aren't exclusions in the rules that don't apply to you that aren't addressed in this. So that's very important to understand that the checklist is not the law. The checklist is a guideline the FCC intended for you to be compliant with their rules. The other FCC, the other thing, I've got several key points. These are just my commandments, if you will, on how to read this. If you have a question about FCC rules and you call the FCC, they are not accurate in their answers a good part of the time. Okay? So you need to understand that if you call FCC, you can't necessarily, particularly if you're dealing with something like moving a station or something like that, the answer is consulting engineer, attorney, not FCC. Okay? They are not, the Federal Communications Commission's regulations and the precedent that happened with those regulations in enforcement is the authority. But the staff at the FCC is not the authority when they give you a verbal answer, okay? So if you have any questions about anything, and I'm not saying that, I mean, I'm a consultant, but I'm not saying that I know everything about it, but we do research, the lawyers do research, and they give you answers. You should be able to hold them accountable for the answers they give you, particularly in writing, okay? And so if you've got a specific policy at the station you're concerned about, specific issue or compliance issues you're concerned about, as much as nobody wants to go to attorneys because they're so expensive, it is worth its weight in gold if you do something wrong to have an attorney's opinion about it. So a good communications attorney. The other thing you need to know, and this is not a reason to let your guard down, but the FCC's resources have diminished. They do not have as many resources as they once did, and they have now divided the country up into zones. So what used to be, New York office is now Maine, Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts. It's everything. Okay, it's everything from pretty much New Jersey north. Okay, that's in the Northeast. And there's kind of a central region and I think a south region. But the point is that they used to have far more personnel than they have. They laid off a bunch of people and then they moved some people from certain offices to other offices. The FCC has a new, he was interim and now they have a new national enforcement person, national enforcement engineering person. His name is Charles Cooper. Charles used to work for a really prestigious engineering firm, and most people at the FCC, most technical people at the FCC, did not work in private before they went to work in technical, which means they don't even know what you're going through. They don't care. I mean, they care, but they don't care. Charles Cooper, and I'm very happy that he did this, he was hired at the Los Angeles Enforcement Division and then was hired as interim national enforcement engineering, and now he's permanent national enforcement engineering, and that's very good news in my opinion, because that is that he really understands what radio people go through. He was a consultant, worked at radio station, he's in television, and he's very, very knowledgeable. The other thing you need to know is the FCC has many higher priorities than broadcasting. So if a lot of us think, well, why in the world are they not doing this or letting us do this or that? Really, the short answer is they just don't care anymore about broadcast. So if somebody has a great idea, a wonderful, bright idea, it means nothing for you to bring it up. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, but it takes a lot of resources to do. But it is important. The FCC pays attention. We talked a little bit about their diminishing, that sort of thing. Let's talk about what will really get them going, okay? What really gets the FCC going, and for everything on this checklist, remember this: life and safety complaints will get the FCC to your door in less than 24 hours, okay? So if somebody calls you and says, hey, you're interfering with a VOR frequency on a, which is like 110, 110 megahertz, which is just outside of the FM band. And there's two FM stations mixing together. You're on the same mountaintop, and you're mixing together, landing on that frequency. And somebody reports you and says you're interfering with that frequency, they will be to your transmitter site, to your door in 24 hours to see how they can fix that, because they don't want planes to crash because of your problems. Okay, and they should. That's a good part of their job. But you do need to know that. You also, none of you guys probably are in this position, but I'll mention it anyway. I maintain a station in Arlington, Virginia, near D.C., and I found out one of the station's competitors called the FCC and said we were interfering with FAA, which we were not. The FCC verified we weren't. I went through the inspection with a guy, but it got him there fast. So somebody it wasn't really a prank, it was a competitor trying to, give their competitor trouble. But in the end of the day, they still showed up. This is Harry. Some of you guys knew Harry Martin. He retired last year. He told me something when I was really super green going to college, and I had some responsibility to call him about a couple of things. And he told me, he gave me some of the most important advice about FCC compliance ever, and that is, do not read the rules for what they say. Read the rules for how the FCC enforces them, okay? So you can sit and read the rule book, and it says, right here, I'm supposed to do this. That may be a rule they haven't enforced. Like you can't eat popcorn and ride a horse in Massachusetts while it's snowing on July 5th. They never enforced that rule, so you don't have to worry about it, okay? But there are some rules that they're more intense. Their priorities are more intense to enforce than others. So it's important to understand and to read the rules for how the FCC enforces them, which was why you need consultants and attorneys, because they can tell you immediately most of the time, oh, this is bad. You shouldn't be doing this. Or, don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. But the reason they're saying that is not just on their whim. The reason they're saying that is because they have knowledge of what the FCC has enforced in the past and what they've refused to enforce in the past.
So you're going to go over some of those?
Yes. And I just mentioned their enforcement priorities. The last one is there are 3 very important areas, and this applies to full power as well as low power right now. The most important areas, actually I think there are 4. The most important areas that the FCC pays attention to and will get you fined. For your full power people, public inspection file. Not doing issues programs, having public inspection file, somebody asking for it, not having access to it. Those are big, big no-nos, okay? Low power, that doesn't apply to you. Tower lights. Most low powers, it doesn't apply to you. Sometimes it does. Most of you don't own a tower that's lit. If you do own a tower that's lit, not monitoring your tower lights, and particularly if the tower lights are out any period of time and you don't report it, that's really bad. EAS compliance, that's the other one. Very important. Okay, emergency alert system compliance is one of their key things. And it is now more than ever because no one really knows whether they're going to fine people who don't properly report the test the national test that's coming. And low power FMs, I believe, are required to do that, even though you don't have to air it because you don't have to have an encoder. Although most of you may have an encoder because that's the only thing Sage sold after that point. But, so maybe you do, maybe you don't. But you have to know that if you've received the test, and I believe you have to report that. And so that is mandatory, and it's mandatory 24 hours after the test. I believe the test is next Wednesday, right? Okay, right. So that's critical. I spoke to somebody who was on the national committee for EAS who was really pushing them not to fine people if they didn't get the test, that it's a test, and the reason that tests exist were to figure out what's wrong. So, hopefully you've already submitted your ETRS form. Tell me you've done that.
Yes.
You did it for me.
I did it for you. You guys? Okay, so everybody's submitted their ETRS form. Okay. So EAS. And the last one is license renewal and filings. That's the other thing. Most of these other issues are operational issues. This is a clerical issue, but this comes from not filing a license renewal, comes from a station operating a whole bunch and having no effective need for attorneys. We don't want you to send us a thing because it costs us $110 every time you send us an email. Don't send us anything else. We'll call you. Don't call us. You tell your attorney. License renewal comes around. You don't get a license renewal. You don't file one for 6 months after the renewal, a year. You've got 2 choices, cancellation or a big fine and reinstatement. Okay? And the fine's a lot more than the legal fees it costs to file the thing. So that's important. So let's get into the checklist a little bit. Those were my baseline. So you need to understand this is where I'm coming from when we go through the list. And I'd like to go ahead and go through the low power self-inspection list first. And I would also like to quiet this call. All right. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to say there are 3 categories that you check. Go ahead. Yeah. I actually don't know when the next renewal period is, but there's a set renewal period. I believe it is every 5 years. I'm not positive. Actually, that's a question I don't know right off the top of my head. But okay, no, there's a renewal period. It normally doesn't work that way. There's a renewal period and there's a renewal time frame for each zone for specific zones of states. And so, yes, so the way license renewals work, so this is for anybody, not just low powers. The way license renewals work is you could buy a station, and if it was renewal year for that station, you'd operate for a year and have to file a license renewal, okay? So it's not every 5 from the time you started. No, okay? So you just need to find that out. Now, the whole license period for the whole country in I think it's a 7-year, it's either 7 or 10 period for renewal has just happened pretty much. It's been, I think the last one was over about a year and a half ago now. So something like that. They will remind you, provided you didn't tell them not to remind you. But you can, because people do that, because it costs money to have them send you things sometimes. But that's something you should work out. I could do a whole nother seminar on attorney management, but that's something that you should discuss with them about what you do and don't want them to hear so that you can manage, or what you do and don't want them to say to you so you can manage costs. Okay? And the more proactive you are, some people, I work for large networks and they don't ever ask their attorney hardly anything because they've been through almost everything the attorney's been through. And they have a compliance person that's resident. But that's not Low Power FM normally. Okay, so there are 3 answers here. If you go to page 1, the 3 answers are, and I'm not talking about the table of contents. The 3 answers are yes, pending, or not applicable. So they don't have one that's like non-compliant. It's always pending. They always assume that you're going to fix it. And I have half an hour, so I'm going to have to go really fast. But do me a favor, if you will.
You can go into our break. This is more important.
Okay. Well, do me a favor. If we go through this, I'm not going to save questions to the end. So if we go through this, I'd like you, if you've got a pressing concern about this, the cool thing is I get to do this before the attorney, so anything that I tell you that's wrong that you're like, oh, man, was he off base? What? Just ask the attorney. They'll tell you. So let's start at section 1, and we're going through the low power list right now. Although I will tell you this, there's nothing on low power that doesn't apply to full power, but there's a bunch of things on full power that apply to, a bunch of things that full powers have to do that low powers don't. That's why I'm going through the list now for low. So section 1, administrative and non-technical authorizations, okay, station license, construction permit, and any other instrument of authorization shall be readily available and easily accessible at the station's principal control point. Meaning, really, the studio for LPFMs, even though LPFMs aren't required to have studios, you pretty much all have studios. So your control point for that, your studio, you should have these posted there. And that is license, construction permit, and other instrument of authorization. It's wise to have both the license and the construction permit posted. And here's the reason. Because sometimes there are operational parameters that are listed in your construction permit that are not listed in your license. So it's wise to do both.
If they have them down the church office, they need to get moved up to the radio station.
It depends on how far the church office is away from the radio station.
Downstairs.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea to have it at the operating control point. I mean, what you don't want to do if the FCC comes in is have to scramble around all over the building for what they want to see. That would be a problem. And plus, if you have an operator and that operator is paying attention to readings and the parameters of the license and operating, then you would want that accessible to that operator. They would kind of think you didn't care. They might. Station logs and records. So entries pertaining to equipment outages due to equipment malfunction, servicing, replacement, and entries for operation. You guys can read this. Activations of EAS. So what you're required to do is the FCC relaxed their rules even before the low power FM service was even put into effect. The FCC relaxed their rules, and there's no like every 3-hour requirement for a reading or anything. But if you're out of tolerance with your power and you get inspected, and when I mean out of tolerance, let's say you're running your transmitter, some guy went, well, this LPFM needs more power. I'm going to turn the transmitter up to 200 watts instead of 100 watts. And without your knowledge, and you're operating that way, and you get inspected, the FCC is going to assume that you were running that much power just since a little after the last reading was taken. So how long ago was that? Was that a year ago? Was that a month ago? Was that a day ago? A day's not that long of a time, but a week can be, a month can be. And there are things that happen with transmitters periodically that will actually cause them to go higher in power without you doing anything. That's a malfunction. What's that?
How do you manage that? How do you know that?
You look at the front of the transmitter and see what the power level is. The other thing that's very important about LPFMs that the FCC said when they were making LPFM rules is LPFMs have a higher burden for making sure their power is okay. Because if you complain that somebody's interfering with you, they'll ignore your complaint if you're running over power. And in fact, you could be subject to worse penalties running over power, slightly over power than a full power. What's up?
So, Ron, are you saying that low power have to do readings? Because
No.
that's not my...
No, I'm not saying low power has to do readings. What I'm saying is you have to stay at your power level. How do you prove that?
And is that what the checklist is telling us to do?
Okay, you got to understand something. This is a subjective part of the FCC's rules. Thank you, John, for smiling, because this is a hard question to answer. The objective part of the FCC's rules is they want you to comply with their rules. So they will assume that you have, and this is their special phrase, policies and procedures to do that. So you're asking me if you have to take readings. The answer is no and yes. That's not what the FCC says. The FCC doesn't say you have to take readings, but they have to say you have to comply with the rules. How are you going to do that?
My question is because our engineer,
Right.
diehard radio engineer,
I understand.
right? I mean, I don't have that in my log. I have no readings in my log.
I understand.
I have no proof of my power.
Right.
So are you saying that that's a good idea to do?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am. I am saying that's a good idea to do. Am I saying the FCC requires it? No. Am I saying it's a good idea to do? Yes.
Do I take a screenshot of my...
You can do it any number of ways. You can take a screenshot of your AUI. Some of you might have a remote control system that automatically sends you a log. You can put most radio stations for years, they put a paper log down and then take a reading. Used to be every 3 hours when it was required that way before the FCC changed those rules. Now, I think once a day is not a bad idea. It's just have somebody regularly pay attention, because it shows the FCC two things. One, you're compliant, and the other is somebody's regularly paying attention. They get really upset when people don't pay attention.
Go ahead, John.
I think there is a setting on the AUI, and Gary, you can correct me, but I believe there's a setting on the AUI where you can have it email you a full set of readings
Yes.
as often as you want to.
That-
I don't think it'll do that, but I do think that you can manually download the reading.
Right, yeah.
So for the internet folks, because I know we've got you listening,
Right.
Gary from Nautel just said that it won't automatically send it to you, like for you VS300 users, but you can get it. You can get those readings recorded and sent. You can do that yourself. Now, one more thing. Richard McIntosh said to me, I'll never forget it. He said, "Protect your license."
That's right.
So that's what this is. This
Absolutely.
is protecting your license.
Absolutely.
And what I'm saying is just for low powers and for those who are just getting into the ball game,
Right.
is that from your technical and consulting point of view, and we can ask Matt
Yes.
tomorrow,
Sure.
is it a daily, is it a monthly, it is a weekly? What would you take a screenshot and put it? 'Cause I'm telling
I
you,
would
Rob,
do it.
I don't have
For
that
a
in
low
my-
power FM, if I did it, I would do it daily.
Yeah, I don't have that in my log, so
I
I
would do
want
it
to
daily.
make sure that
Right.
I agree, protect my
Right.
license.
I would do it daily. For low power, I would do it daily. And it has to do with your diligence as a broadcaster. Because this just says, I mean, if you read this and you read it in light of what I've just said, station logs include entries pertaining to equipment outages due to equipment malfunction. Okay, so that at least indicates that you've looked at a piece of equipment to know if it was malfunctioning. Servicing or replacement, entries for operation not in accordance with the station license, that would be over or under power, among other things, over or under modulation. Entries requiring related to required test of and activations of the emergency alert system when applicable. And you have to keep an EAS log, and that's very important.
Right. and
My
I'm doing
suggestion
that.
to you is keep a separate log with your, this is my personal opinion, keep a separate log of your transmitter readings in your EAS. Why? Because when the FCC comes to your door, they may be spot checking EAS, and if you show them a log that shows you out of parameter, you don't want them asking any more questions. You never give the FCC more than they ask for, but you better give them what they ask for. Okay? And so I would keep them in 2 logs myself. The other thing with EAS that you're required to do, and we can talk about this will come later. You're also supposed to do a weekly review of your EAS logs, okay? And sign those logs that you've reviewed, okay? And this will be addressed in the checklist. And that's required to be done every week. And you're also required to keep a log, some kind of comment log or something with the EAS so that if there is a problem, you can note what problem that was and what you did to attempt to correct it. And that could...
I know this. I'm sorry. How do I know? My problem is there's nobody in our station daily.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I have one guy who's supposedly setting up all the EAS stuff, and I do all the managing of the station.
Right.
I have no idea. Like, how do I find that stuff out?
Well, okay. Emergency alert system equipment has automatic logging on it that will either, in some cases, spit out a tape, other cases that logs online, and you can see from a front panel that you received a test. Okay.
So once a week I would take that log and put it in my notebook? Is that what you're saying?
You would, but you'd also review it to make sure that you got a test from each of the different sources in the EAS, including CAP. It's simple to do, but it's an important procedure, and it's a required procedure.
The learning curve is really hard on some of this stuff after you've done it like for a week. You're an expert. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
We always tell our people, because we have a lot of volunteers and we are full power, if the FCC comes in and asks you any question, I don't know is the automatic wrong answer.
That's true.
So,
Yeah.
so whether you're an LPFM or full power, just be able to prove it.
Right. That's right.
Because we started keeping a log of when our power went down, when we heard our power went down. Like,
No. That's the wrong time to do it.
that's what I'm saying. Like,
Right. And so yeah, you would want to keep a log. Again, it needs to be regular and repeatable. If there's a problem, you have to record that problem. And the FCC wants you to note the outages. They want you to note any discrepancies in your readings that you know about. But just keeping the process of keeping the readings, and with EAS, of course, that's a repeatable thing. You're supposed to get a required weekly test every week.
a federal, state, and local?
No, it's one test it's one required RWT, required weekly test, for each station. But the required weekly test isn't required the week they give the monthly test. Okay? And the monthly test, if most EAS or sort of local organizations, local chairs, they put out they release a schedule of when they're going to send the monthly test. You know when those are going to happen, okay? And then you'll forward that monthly test, so you make sure your equipment's on automatic to do that. Your weekly test you do not forward. You also send a weekly test, which LPFMs are, I believe, required to do, but not with the encoding devices. I need to check on that, but that may be, I need to double check on that one.
So you're saying to separate our logs out from EAS as a transmitter?
It's not a bad idea. I'm not saying that some people don't do that. Some people do EAS transmitter and it's all there. That's fine.
I do a station log of any issues, but I also put it on my weekly, like a summary page.
Yes.
I have all my EAS, I have my daily check,
Yeah.
I have any issues with the station for the week.
It's a preference of mine. It's not something you have to do. I'm not telling you go change your procedure.
Rope to hang yourself with.
Right. Yeah. And if you have something problematic going on and your EAS is doing fine, it could be the other way around. You could have, you just don't want to provide too much information if you get inspected,
Just like he said,
It's kind of like this. It's kind of like being stopped for going like 60 and a 55, and you saying to the officer, you realize my taillight's out too. Oh, thanks. So station logs and records. So understand that I can't actually sit here and tell you exactly that anything is required because the FCC doesn't say anything's required. But if you keep station records, then this is what you're supposed to abide by. Okay, so you've got a retention, 2 years. You have to keep those for 2 years.
Rob, what I'm just saying is, in the last 3 years of conferences, I've never heard that before.
Okay.
And I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
No, it's no problem.
That's why we're here, because we all want to keep our license.
Right.
And I'm doing
Right.
my EAS log.
Sure.
I got that. But I've never heard to keep my reading. Because
Right.
we're low power FM. That's all we kept hearing. Because you guys are low
See,
power FM.
it's not about what the FCC, in this particular case, keeping that is not what the FCC is telling you to do, letter of the law. It has to do with when there's a problem, you being diligent, they're seeing that you're diligent. See, you have to understand, there are some bad actors in low power FM. And low power FMs will triple their power sometimes. And then somebody else comes back in, they'll turn it back down. And, K-Wave, there's a low-power FM that's near K-Wave, and K-Wave is paying a consultant to have a monitoring point for that low power so that we know if they try to turn up their power and interfere with K-Wave. I mean, that's extreme, but it definitely happens. So, those are the things. And with the FCC knowing there's such bad actors, how do you know you're running the right power? Well, if you don't keep any logs, the right answer is stare at the front panel of the transmitter and say, it says I'm supposed to run this power on my license, and I'm running this power right here, okay? Transmitter power output, okay? And that's the right answer if you're not keeping logs. The right answer if you are keeping logs is, well, that's what the power level says, and here's the power levels for the last month or two. Bam, you're done. No problem. Thank you, sir. Done. So,
So quick question, Marcos from K-Wave in LA, just clarifying. So the transmitter readings will be part of the official station operating log?
yes.
Right. And then EAS, you mentioned earlier keeping a separate EAS
You could keep,
thing.
yes. It's not, you don't have to keep a separate log. You can
No,
put it all in one
no,
log, but yeah,
right,
it's wise.
but protecting your license, good faith effort, policies and procedures. Right.
That's right. Okay. So on this, because I need to get off the first page since we've got 15 minutes left. That's good, though. It's good discussion. Station logs and records, period of 2 years. Are they readily available for inspection and duplication at the request of the FCC or its representatives? Notice this did not say the public. You don't have to show your EAS or your transmitter logs to Joe Schmo that walks off the street. Okay, so that's important. Do the logs and records clearly, accurately document all the repairs, et cetera? That goes hopefully without saying. If any change is made in your parameters, you need to record that. And do the logs contain the time and the date of each observation of the person making the entry? Okay, let's move on to the next page. So your operating schedule, all low-power FMs are required at least 36 hours per week of operation, consisting of at least 5 hours a day and 6 hours a week. However, stations licensed to educational institutions are not required to operate on Saturday or Sunday and observe minimum operating requirements. This is one of these that is very interesting because what it doesn't say is how you got your LPFM license. Because if you represented that you were going to do 8 hours a day of locally originated programming, then you better be doing that. So go know how you got your license, because most LPFMs that I'm aware of that are in anything close to a metro area got their license because they on points because they represented that they would operate a certain number of hours a day with local programming. Yeah. Okay, I would ask your, and I'm not going to argue with Harry on that point. I'm saying I would ask if that requirement is required without any additional request from the FCC. You told the FCC you do it, but since you're the only one who applied, is that singleton, is that point deducted automatically, or do you have to ask that question? I'm not sure myself. If Harry told you you could do it, and he told you in writing, then do what he told you in writing. Okay. Right, good. But make sure that no additional. There are cases where somebody wins in a competitive proceeding, and this applies to your full power guys too, who have certain operating parameters that they had to abide by. For instance, 4 years of continuous on-air operation. Sometimes you have that situation to deal with. If you end up as a singleton and there was a settlement as opposed to actually a competitive award, many times those requirements can be dropped. But some attorneys would argue, I think, that the requirement may need to be dropped with request of the point taken down. I don't know that. I would ask Matt if you were Matt or Kathleen if you needed. Okay, let's see. Station ID. You guys are aware of what a station identification is. The call letters followed by the community of license, not the call letters by where you wish it went. Okay. Yeah. Let's just say that the Calvary Chapel here, licensed to Myrtle Beach, decided that they really wish it went to Conway, and they wanted to identify with the community of Conway because their studios are there. Okay? They don't say Conway first. They can say it last, but they can't say it first. It's got to be.
Say thanks for listening to, right? It doesn't just literally have to say WWSHLP, Vero Beach.
Vero Beach, you could say WWSHLP Vero Beach. What's an adjacent community you reach? Do you reach any other community?
Yeah, I mean, anywhere.
Vero Beach, Melbourne. You don't reach Melbourne, I'm sure, but
I mean, I'm just saying, we don't have to, that doesn't, the last thing I was told was, it doesn't have to be the only thing I say. I can say
right.
thanks for listening.
Before and after. And you can say other cities after. You just can't say any other city other than your community of license and the call letters.
And it's just the city, not the state, correct?
You don't have to say the state. No. Yeah. And I believe you're allowed to say the frequency in between.
Yes, I think I read.
Yeah. Station identification. We did that. And you have to say LP. Yeah. Non-commercial status, LPFMs are non-commercial service, can only be licensed to non-commercial entities, don't air commercials. I'll let the legal session talk about what that is and what it isn't, but make sure that you're not really airing commercials on your low-power FM station or your non-commercial station. Retransmission. LPFM licensee may not retransmit terrestrial via satellite the signal of a full-power radio broadcast station. Do not repeat another radio station. So if you like something somebody else is doing in the community and you decide you just want to re-air that, don't do it. It's not allowed. It's allowed on a full power station. It's allowed on a translator. Isn't allowed on a low power station. It was the intent of the low power FM station lobby to prevent large networks from forming out of low power FM stations. So if this, you may win this case, but if you sound exactly like K-Wave in every programming element, even though you don't re-air them, you're probably not in any trouble with the law, but you probably, but somebody might put two and two together and say, well, you're Calvary Chapel and they're Calvary Chapel. You're not re-airing them, but you might be mimicking them. So there's no problem with it, mimicking them, but somebody may say, well, you might as well be re-airing them. Well, there's a fine line. Okay. Let's see. Station inspections. So the licensee of an LPFM broadcast station shall make for the station available for inspection by representatives of the FCC during the station's business hours and any time it is in operation. When can the FCC visit you? Anytime they want that you're in operation, and during business hours, even if you're not in operation.
So 9 o'clock at night, because we're airing, they could show up at the station, but there's no one there?
Yes, but you should be putting a phone number or something on the door of a station if you're running unattended so that somebody can contact you. Absolutely. It doesn't say that you have to do that either, but you should be doing that because understand, radio stations are radio frequency facilities, and radio frequency transmitters have the ability to cause havoc in other services like fire and police and aviation. That would be a real issue. I would do it tomorrow. You know, is get something on the door, and responsible party. Go ahead. Okay. Right. Right.
But can we rebroadcast our LPFM and another LPFM because it's not a full power?
Consult your attorney on that. My personal opinion is possibly you could. It says full power, okay, but I would consult an attorney about this because, for instance, what's local programming? Local programming isn't airing David Jeremiah from your studios. That's not local programming. Local programming is local. 8 hours of local is hard to do. It is, well, the attorneys at Fletcher Held have said this. I've heard other attorneys have different opinions about it. It could be the arrangement of songs in a DJ situation, in an automated situation, potentially, okay? But what it isn't is some other guy from some other place with programming originated from some other place, talking about some other place that you air from your studio. That's not local. So if you pledge to 8 hours local, you're not doing that. But what that means is local for you in another community for that LPFM might not mean local for them. So if you network those two stations, you may have that problem on your hands. Okay, so that brings up a different issue. Well, actually, the FCC, don't have this in front of me, but the FCC has a definition of local that's within a certain radius. In this particular case, the community, your community of license, and within a certain radius of the station, I think in LPFM's case. I think they tried to make it pretty clear what local was in that case. It's programming originated, I thought it was 10 miles, but it's 10 miles in a certain population and 5 miles within another metro of another type of category of population. You would want to look that up, but that is important, is locally originated programming. And what you represented to the FCC you would do, particularly if you got your license competitively.
How many hours of locally originated programming?
Well, okay.
On a standard basis.
This doesn't necessarily have to do with what FCC rules say. It has to do with how you got your license. Okay, so if you told the FCC there's a checkbox that said I'll air 8 hours a day, then you got to do 8 hours a day.
It wouldn't necessarily apply to every LPFM.
It doesn't necessarily apply to LPFM. You've got to look at your own case.
And where do you find that information? That's not on your license.
Yeah, you will find that information in the construction permit application that you filed. That is the correct construction permit application that you filed when you filed for the station. So if Bob Moore did your application, it would be the thing he did for you, not the license application, but the CP application. Go ahead.
We acquired our LPFM from another existing station, so it would be in their original.
You're going to need to ask the attorney about that. That's a great question. That's a great question. Do all of those? I would imagine they would. They would assimilate to you those representations, but that is not a question I can answer. That you would need to ask your attorney about that. That's a good one. I kind of hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
You can still find it on FCC query.
That's right. Right. Okay. Political file. LPFM licensees are to have a complete record of all requests for broadcast time made by or on behalf of candidates for public office. I'm going to skip this, and there's a reason, because there's an open question about whether this is applicable across the board, and I would rather have attorneys address this in the legal seminar, this particular one. Basically, if this requirement is in force, if you're contacted by a local politician, then you have to log that request and keep a copy of that. This is what a full power station would keep in their public inspection file. But for a low power, it's saying that you have to retain those requests for broadcast time. However, there's a commercial and non-commercial, the issue surrounds it is whether non-commercials are beholden to this particular requirement. And I would ask that question in the legal seminar because I've... No, but somebody still may contact you to be on.
So if they ask,
And if there's a request, yes.
but we can deny.
Yes. now I'm getting into full power rules. If you're a commercial station, you can deny everybody, okay? But if you sell time to one in your commercial station, then you got to do it to everybody, right? Telephone conversations. This is a very important thing. If you air a phone call, then you need to tell the person you're airing the phone call. Before you air it. That's right.
On the recording or just
To them. So, does the station notify callers of their intent to broadcast the conversation before recording or airing the call? All right. Yeah. You'll want it at some point. Antenna structure registration. Okay, so just by show of hands, because I can skip this, how many of you own your own structure that you have your antenna on? Do we? No, we don't. Well, you own your building. You don't own the tower in Rustburg. That's right. Yeah, it applies to you. I forgot about Dillon. We take care of that station. I forgot about it. Okay. If you own a structure and it's required to be registered by the FCC, here's a good one, and this needs to be asked. I didn't get a chance to contribute on CCRM, but this is very important to ask, and I'll bet you'll stump them. Okay? The attorneys, serious, everybody, low power FM, whatever. If you own your structure, there is a new rule, and some deadlines that you're going to end up having to register and potentially light, but certainly register a structure under 200 feet. If it's not in a major metro area, I think that's the way it works. Okay? And I just saw that come through, and I've actually been wanting to discuss it with the attorneys. So if you own a pole in a place that's not a city or a metro area, and you've got your antenna on the pole, you need to check out to find out whether that needs to be registered. Okay? That's a new thing. So, it floored me, but it certainly could affect several people in this room. And it's not on this list, by the way. This isn't necessarily gospel. So, this is, if you're required to do your antenna structure registration, then the FCC has requirements for that, including posting a sign stating, with the antenna structure registration number on the sign in a conspicuous place available to be seen by the public.
Rob, you're not sure on the height, though, yet.
No. There will be specific requirements about height, and I don't know that right off the bat. It's a range. It's a height range. And it's also, and I'm not even sure the FCC is clearly defined, although I'm interested in this. I don't know if they've clearly defined the difference between you being in a city and not in a city. You sound like you want to say something, John. No, it's what's that? Right. Right, that's right. That's that. So we would want to find out. I haven't read those pending rules myself, so I don't know. But yes, it is pending rules. But it's not just FAA, though. I understand that it may require ASR as well. So antenna specifics. Okay, so this is also important. Does the construction permit, station license, or other instrument of authorization provide authority for the station to operate under a specific set of operating parameters? Okay, so you have a set of operating parameters. The licensee must thoroughly review the current station authorization and, where applicable, the structure registration to compare the listed specifications to the location, height, etc., that is actually used by this station. All LPFM stations may use non-directional antennas with horizontal, vertical, or circular or elliptical polarization. Directional antennas will be authorized to eligible public safety and transportation licensees in connection with the operation of Travelers Information Service. Okay. This is another interesting one for LPFM and another change since they put this list out. Okay. If you were licensed as an LPFM previous to this sort of last round where you were allowed to use second or third adjacent channel where you specified a actual antenna type as a condition to get your construction permit, then you have to have that antenna type. You're not allowed to change it, okay? You go, oh, well, there's a 2-bay antenna up there. I just wanted a 1-bay, and I'll run double the transmitter power. Well, maybe you can. That may be fine. Or it might not be, depending on how you got your LPFM station. This probably doesn't apply to many people in this room because many of you are not recent low-power FM licensees. Yeah, how long ago? Yeah, it might, and you'd want to check that. You know, so that would be another situation. Other than that, you just want to make sure that if your antenna is the right height, your antenna location, the geographic coordinates. Now, let me talk a little bit about antenna location. This is important because I've heard some rumblings of things, like somebody thinks they could move a low-power FM station, say, a quarter mile and not tell the FCC. That would not be right. Really, people would say it's 800 feet or it's something. No, it's supposed to be within 1 second of latitude and longitude, which is about 30, depending on the latitude or the longitude and where you are in the United States, 30 to 60 feet, okay? But it's not an arbitrary 30 or 60 feet. You've got to check, okay? So if you want to put a pole that was here, right here, you're on pretty good authority that you can do that. If you want to put a pole that's here, right here, you got to get a construction permit, a new construction permit with the FCC. So you call Bob Moore, consulting engineer, whoever, to apply for that for you. And keep in mind that, going back to the last thing, if you were licensed with a special antenna, that engineer that did that application to license you with a special antenna measured the distance between the nearest house and residence and your tower. So it might even be that if you were here, you couldn't even move to here, just outside of the limit, because you may be prohibited because you're too close to population. It's possible. That's a second adjacent channel situation. But so what you understand is the moral of this story is don't move your antenna location, full power, low power, whatever, without authorization from the FCC, okay? The other thing is make sure they're the correct height, okay? 100 feet is not the same as 100 meters. Some people confuse those. So it is important not to have your antenna too high. The FCC will derate your power and make you go to a lower power if you're too high. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. If you have tower lights to observe at your station, then obviously you're supposed to observe them at least once every 24 hours or have an automatic indicating device that will alarm you for that. And then you are to call the FAA if you have a problem. In other words, if you have a problem with the tower lights, and call in something called a notice to airmen, so that the pilots that are flying over your tower that might actually look at you for visual reference and don't see you and might get confused, there's a notice to them that you're out, that your light's out, or there's something wrong. Just if you own the tower, right. Painting and lighting. Same thing. You're supposed to have your paint, and it's not supposed to be faded. This doesn't apply to too many people, and I take care of probably the one station it applies for, so I'm not worried about that. FAA notifications, I just mentioned that if there's an outage. Station logs. Okay, that's the other thing. If you have an antenna structure, if you get an antenna structure, you know, somebody gives you the tower you're on, for you, in your case, okay? So if you had to keep tower light logs, if there's a light on it, then those tower light logs are also part of your station logs. So you'd have either 3 logs or 1 log or however you chose to keep them, tower lights, EAS readings if you chose to keep those. So and the FCC is as intense about tower lights, probably more intense than it is about emergency alert system. But both are critical. So now we go on to emergency alert system. We've already kind of answered some questions about this. Are there any other questions about EAS? I'll ask that rather than just kind of going on. So everybody's got the EAS program to, and actually, this reporting thing was great as far as I'm concerned, because it was just a great spot check that everybody's actually right. You're really monitoring the right thing, so you had to represent that you did in your form.
One comment.
Yes.
Curtis reminded me about that it's good to have a schedule to periodically check your audio monitors.
Yes.
Because it can easily get overlooked.
The best thing to do probably is to do that once a week. But yes, have some kind of a schedule to check whether your emergency alert system equipment is operational. In other words, it's almost like not waiting until something would go out. One would think you'd find that in an investigation of a problem, but that's a great point, Or it could be faded. You could hear a signal that was really strong and nice, and then all of a sudden it's not that nice. Maybe it's being detected, but that's a sign of a potential further problem. Okay, on your emergency alert system equipment, there is usually a button or a series of buttons or menus that you go through to listen to the receivers that are feeding it. So you can hear the weather receiver, you'll hear WXXX or whatever it is, that you're receiving to retransmit that for the code. And you'll listen to those feeds just physically and verify that they actually you're hearing them. Let's see. All right, and then of course I'm assuming everybody's got a decoder and receivers at least. Let's see here. And we've gone through EAS tests pretty much, and we've gone through station logs. And if you fail to receive an EAS test in your weekly check, you should call the station and ask when they sent the test, okay? Because sometimes stations miss tests too. If it's done manually and it's done by a log, the traffic person at the station that's supposed to be sending you your test you're supposed to be receiving might have left it out that week. Because not every radio station has their EAS unit on automatic. You should. You should have your EAS equipment on automatic to forward it. But if you have a staff of many and every DJ knows how, or your automation system is automatically programmed to do that EAS after the next song when they're allowed to do it, that's okay. But probably everybody in this room doesn't run that, and that's sophisticated in operation. Technical requirements, power versus height. Okay, and I don't think we've got a whole lot to go here. A little bit better than that. Okay. The last page should be a recap, the unattended operation. Technical requirements, power versus height. For low power 100 stations, which there is no such thing as a low power 10, LP10, so that can be ignored. Maximum facilities authorized will be based on 100 watts effective rated power at additional height above average terrain of 30 meters. That's gibberish to most people. What it means is that the FCC intends for every station to go as far as 100 meters or 30 meters, 100 feet. So 100 watts at 100 feet. That's how far the FCC intends for your signal to go. If you wanted to put it up 300 watts or 300 feet and do 2 watts or whatever the FCC lets you do, that's still going to go, theoretically, the same distance as 100 watts at 100 feet. Okay, because FM works on line of sight. The higher you put it up within a parameter, the further it goes. So if you had 100 watts and you raised your antenna up to 300 feet at 100 watts, you'd be violating the rules, but your signal would go a lot farther. But you'd be in violation of the rules. It also says that an LPF1 station with a height above average terrain that exceeds 30 meters will not be permitted to operate. And that doesn't mean above ground. I want to be clear about that. The height above average terrain is an engineering calculation that we do to determine what the average height of the place you're standing on based on radials taken over miles. Radials meaning measurements in different directions of ground elevation taken over miles. So that doesn't mean because you're not 100 feet up, or because you're 100 feet up, you should be allowed 100 watts. That's not what it means. So the FCC will issue you that power level at that power level range. No facility will be authorized in excess of 1 watt ERP at 450 meters above average terrain, which means the lowest power level, low power FM would do is 1 watt. However, or less than that, even down to fractions of a watt potentially, if you're higher than 450 meters above average terrain. So 450 meters above average terrain is what, about 1,500 feet? Okay, so if you're 1,500 feet above average terrain, now in this coast, doesn't make not a whole lot of difference. There's a few mountains that are like that. On the west coast, K-wave is 3 times that high. Okay, it's on a 1 mile high mountain overlooking California coast. So an LPFM theoretically wouldn't even be allowed on that mountain at 1 watt. So are you operating within your power and height requirements? Look at your license and just make sure that's your audit. Power determination. Transmitter power output of an LPFM station must be determined by the procedures set forth in 73.267 of the rules, which actually isn't a low power FM rule section. The operating power of the LPFM authorized TPO means total power or transmitter power output. Transmitter power output. So just because you're 100 watt, your LP100 station does not give you the right to operate 100 watts on your transmitter. You may have the right to operate, if you're a 1-bay antenna, at far more than that, at up to 250, maybe 300 watts if you got a filter, but out of your transmitter. Or if you've got a 4-bay antenna, you may only have to be able to operate at 50 or 70 watts. So it depends on what antenna do you have. And here's the other thing. If you change antennas, number of bays, even a single bay antenna types have different gains. So if you change an antenna, that can change your operating power level. And you should recalculate it and tell the FCC. So these are all things, somebody says, well, we could do so much better with a better antenna. Well, then you have to go back and recalculate. So an LPFM with an authorized power of, the operating power of an LPFM authorized with a TPO more than 10 watts must be maintained as near as practicable to its authorized TPO and be not less than 90% of the minimum TPO nor greater than 100% of the maximum authorized TPO. This is different than full power operation. Full power operation has a set power level. LPFMs have a range. Usually the range goes from 50% of their authorized power to 100% of their authorized power. What this is saying is you could run at 105% or you could run at 10% lower than 50. Okay? That's what this is saying. It's not saying that you have to keep it inside that upper range. For full power stations, they do. If you operate outside of the range, let's say you're, and this will happen to most of you LPFMs at some time in your life. Let's say that you have a 100-watt transmitter and you can't operate, the transmitter breaks, and your crack engineer says, you know what, I got a 10-watt exciter and I can just put that puppy in for you and at least you'll be on the air serving, 20 blocks, okay? But you're going to be on the air, okay? And you're like, that's great, and then you forget about it. Well, you're supposed to tell the FCC by special temporary authority. You're supposed to ask the FCC for permission to operate at that low a power level. So that's important. When it says these parameters, if you're outside of these parameters, there are procedures that you need to go through to make sure that, first of all, you're not allowed to operate in any case above 105%. You don't get a special temporary authority to do that. But if you're operating below the low power, the lowest power that you can operate, then you have to ask the FCC and get permission to do that. That's something that an consulting engineer and a consulting engineer in conjunction with an attorney could file with you to do. The best thing to do is just get your transmitter fixed. 10 days is what you're required to notify them, and 30 days is what you're required to get an actual authority for. So if you're less than 10 days at a low power like that, no big deal.
Is that the same for full power?
Yes. Yeah, only the difference is you don't have from 40% to 105, you've got from 90 to 105% of your operating power level.
So I got a question.
Yes.
So on our Nautel unit, our license is 100
Mhm.
but we do like 307
Right.
because 100 is coming out as effective wattage.
That's right.
And on the unit, when I do the toolbox,
Mhm.
it comes up with the display, and it'll say the 307, and then there's some kind of display that's showing the 100. Is that 100 pretty accurate, that I can trust that that's actually what's coming out
I don't.
from the display of the toolbox?
There's nothing on there. If your TPO is 307, it knows nothing about the 100.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it knows nothing about the 100. You may see a parameter within your Nautel that's a different reading of some type,
I
but
think there's a little display or something showing that I'm at my 100, maybe it's 100%.
your remote control may show that. You may have that in your remote control, not your Nautel interface, but your remote control, that could show the 100. Oh, no, that's different. 100% is your modulation indicator. That's how loud you are.
And so that doesn't mean
What's
I'm
that?
not doing effective.
Yes. Right.
Modulation level to be in?
100%. Pretty much. Yeah. And some people will say, this is another thing I usually do in other seminars, and we're almost done here, that I usually give in other engineering seminars, is the public in FM, and this is crazy, but it's really true. Some people say, well, I don't need a good processor. I don't need a good audio processor. Okay, because it's just, I got one. It's built in. It's okay. I don't really need a great one. The public perceives power in FM to be loudness. They want it to be clear. They want to be able to hear it. And they don't want it to be tiring to listen to and fatiguing. But they perceive power as loudness. In AM, that's true. In FM, it's not true. Okay? In FM, you have an apparent loudness. That's why $10,000 audio processors are sold. And that's why if you're running only, if you're not running a Crown transmitter or, well, whatever transmitter you're using with not a very big processor, then somebody could come up, you tune to other radio stations, they all sound lower than you. Well, they're operating, most of them are operating at 100% modulation, and so are you. What's the difference? The difference is the electronics and the technology in the audio processor. You can make yourself sound as good as a 100,000 watt radio station in town because it's a perception thing, okay? In FM, the power would determine, and the power arriving or the signal arriving at your antenna doesn't determine how loud you are, it determines how clear you are, okay? It determines if when you have dead air completely and you turn off your audio, it's dead quiet, okay? And my guess is if you're 10 miles out from your LPFM and you do that, and then you listen to a 100,000 watt station and they were to do the same thing, they're going to be quiet and you're going to be noisy. So the difference in FM, when you're dealing with low power FM and understand where our signal does and doesn't go, an audio processor will effectively not help you in your actual coverage area. Only more power or more height or a different antenna location would do that, okay? But it would help you to your perceived loudness or your perceived signal to the public. Because, how many of you ever had a phone call? LPFMs always get these phone calls. How many of you have a phone call and said, my signal's weak? Your signal's weak. Well, that can mean two things. That could mean I can't hear you in my basement or far out from the signal, or it could mean your audio's low. And so you have to ask the right question when somebody calls you. So the last page on unintended operation, and then this will be the end. The last page on unintended operation, we kind of addressed this in the beginning. You asked, well, should we should we keep logs? Should we not keep logs? Well, there's an element of this that applies to low power FMs, and there's an element of that applies to full power FMs. So broadcast stations doesn't differentiate between full power and FM here, may be operated in either attended or unattended mode. Okay? When the FCC reduced their requirements back in probably late 1990s, when they reduced their requirements for unattended versus attended operation, There are some stations they didn't even require to have a remote control unit, full powers. So you just operated, transmitter stayed within parameters, everything's fine, right? Well, it is, but then the FCC started inspecting these stations and realized, well, the people who do that, they might not have done it with as much of a stable transmitter. So they left it up to the licensee as to how he was going to put a procedure in place to comply with the rules. And the rules were ambiguous. They would also say, well, you don't have to have a modulation monitor. But then they would say, but you've got to know if your modulation's out within 3 hours. If you don't have a modulation monitor, then how are you going to know that? Well, now, the wonderful thing about Nautels is, I love the modulation monitor on Nautels. That was genius, to do that. And help me, Gary, is there alarming on the Nautels for modulation?
Only for like a silent sense.
Silent sense, so low, yeah. But for the most part, when you set up a good processor, you're going to set your modulation up to 100%, good. But in places where people didn't have Nautels, which was at the time they made these rules, most people, you had to have a separate monitor to monitor how loud you were, your modulation, effectively. And the crazy thing about it is the FCC says, well, you don't really have to have one of those, but we want you to know within 3 hours if you're out. Well, how do I know that? Well, I don't have the measuring instrument, so I don't know. So they would really only fine people at that point. They wouldn't fine you for not having a modulation monitor. They'd fine you if you walked in and you were over modulation. So those are ways that the rules can be somewhat ambiguous. So attended and unattended operation is the same way. They require you to know certain things. So, should you have a remote control? Should you not have a remote control? Well, in an LPFM's case, I think a lot of LPFMs probably don't. My opinion is you should have a remote control if you're not at the studio. Because if you're off the air, it'll call you, okay, or send you an email if it's a good one, a different one. And, it would be a good idea for you to have a unit to know what your power is at all times. Yes. If you don't have other things to monitor at your transmitter site, that's right. A Nautel AUI, if you can log into it. By the way, I'll plug a browser. I got so frustrated because I have an iPad and I'm an Apple guy, and I couldn't, for the longest time, use my iPad to look at a Nautel transmitter until I downloaded the Puffin browser. And that changed my life. So anyway, but now there's a number of mobile devices that you can look at the Nautel, Nautel interface. And yes, that will serve as your remote control unit. If you're running some other transmitter other than a Nautel, then it might be a good idea for you to get a remote control unit just so that you know what those parameters are.
Would you say that again, Rob? I think I missed what you just said there.
A transmitter other than Nautel, is that what you're saying? Oh, okay. Yeah, that you'd have to buy a remote control. That's right. Or just buy a Nautel. That's right. That's what I think that was what he was leading to. All right. So this is important. Even though the FCC does not require a main studio for an LPFM station, I'm sitting here reading the LPFM list. And it says, does the licensee maintain a person on duty at a fixed location during all periods the station is on the air, where they can either monitor or control the station themselves or be contacted by automatic transmitter monitoring equipment within 3 hours of an out-of-tolerance condition, or when after an out-of-tolerance condition arises. Or, alternately, unattended, does the licensee maintain either automatic equipment or periodic human monitoring that enables the station operation to be corrected or terminated within 3 hours of an out-of-tolerance condition? So that would be your remote control. That would be Nautel alarming you if you had an out-of-tolerance condition. Or for notification for unattended operations, did the licensee notify the Commission's Media Bureau in writing of the address and phone number of the responsible party? I think that's done on your license application. But that would be another thing. If you have an unattended operation, the FCC would want to know how to get a hold of somebody. This is particularly applicable in places where you don't have a studio. A lot of LPFMs operate out of a closet. They don't have a studio. There's nobody there. They may even operate the thing by remote control from their house. So the FCC is going to want to know the number of that responsible party. Now, the other thing that's important is what I mentioned to her is, put a sign up outside your door. So when they come, they're not looking for your radio station. That's critical. And particularly for your full power guys, you're required to do a main studio, and you're required to tell the FCC where the main studio is. They don't like to look for one when they come. They want to know it's there. So I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions or any questions afterwards, be happy to answer.
Thank you.
So for you folks on the internet, we're back here in 5 minutes or so. Marcos, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate your input.